Hi, it's Father Kurt again. This is the third episode about Holy Week. I hope that you've seen Palm Sunday and Maundy Thursday, where we heard about how the crowds cheered with excitement when Jesus arrived in Jerusalem because they hoped that Jesus would save them. Jesus was a beacon of great hope. A few days later, on Thursday, Jesus told his disciples that they would betray him and that he would die. That was hard for the disciples to believe. And after supper in Upper Jerusalem, Jesus and his disciples came here to the Garden of Gethsemane at the foot of the Mount of Olives. The garden is still here, and some of these olive trees are 1,000 years old. Jesus came here to pray after supper on Thursday night. His disciples joined him, and Jesus told them to keep watch as he prayed, but they fell asleep. In the church that sits in this garden today, there is a painting of what happened. Let me show you. Now you can see Jesus in the center of this mural. And if I move, you can see the disciples over here asleep. One of the disciples didn't join Jesus here. Judas, he went to the religious authorities, the chief priests in Jerusalem, and took 30 pieces of silver, about 30 days of wages, to lead their soldiers to Jesus. Judas led them to the garden, and then he kissed Jesus on the cheek to show them who they should arrest. Now Jesus was taken back to Upper Jerusalem, to the high priest Caiaphas' home. Now let me show you that place. We're back here in Upper Jerusalem. This is the home of Caiaphas. This is where the first trial of Jesus took place. If you look on these doors behind me, this is a picture of the trial itself engraved onto the doors of Caiaphas' home. Most of the time, the questions that the chief priest asks, Jesus didn't answer them. But when they asked him if he was the Messiah, the anointed one, the Christ, the one set aside to save the people, Christ said that he was. And for that, they found him guilty of blasphemy. Now, blasphemy is an offense against God. Now, Jesus then was sent to the political leader, the Roman governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate. He met with him in the old city. The place where he met no longer exists. Pilate didn't know what to do with Jesus because he didn't think Jesus had done anything illegal. But some people really wanted him to be put to death. And Pilate didn't know what to do. So he sent him to Herod Antipas, the Jewish political leader. And Herod and his supporters made fun of Jesus, but eventually sent him back to Pilate for trial. Pilate decided to leave the decision up to the crowds. He did this because it allowed him to gain favor with the people while having them make the difficult decision. See, he didn't care about Jesus. He felt that he couldn't really win. Whatever he decided would be unpopular with some part of the crowd. The crowds were charged with deciding who would be crucified, and there were two options: Barabbas, a well-known criminal, or Jesus, the person with whom the crowds had placed their hope just a few days before. The rumors spread by the religious authorities about Jesus worked. The crowds called for Jesus to be crucified, so Pilate ordered it to happen. Jesus then carried his cross, the beam across his shoulder, through Jerusalem to a place called Golgotha, a rock quarry just outside the city wall. Christian pilgrims have followed that same path for thousands of years. Let me take you there. Here we are, just outside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Now, this church was built over Golgotha, the rock quarry where Jesus was crucified. The church was founded here in the year 335. The entry that you see here was built around the year 1099. Jesus was lifted onto the cross and left to die on a rock mound at Golgotha. And the rock mound is just inside the bricked door that you see behind me, up a steep flight of stairs. Now, crucifixion was a painful way to die, and Jesus was put on the cross at noon on Friday, and 3 hours later he died. Today, pilgrims enter these doorways, turn right, and walk up the stairwell to go to that rock mound. Let me show you. Now we've come in those doors, walked up the steep flight of steps, and are standing on a balcony that overlooks the church. And this altar sits over the spot where Jesus' cross stood inside the ancient Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Now, millions of people visit here every year, kneeling down to place their hand in the hole carved into the rock. And just a short distance away, inside the same church, right in front of me, you can visit where Jesus was buried. It was a tomb in a cave that had a heavy stone rolled in front of it. The tomb belonged to a man named Joseph of Arimathea. He was a high-ranking religious leader, but he didn't agree with the way they treated Jesus. And he arranged for Jesus to be placed in the tomb that he owned. And the tomb was sealed before the sun set on that Friday. Now that was important because the setting of the sun on Friday meant that the Sabbath had begun. And the Sabbath meant that no one could work. If it had happened later in the day, the religious law would have forbidden Jesus from being placed in the tomb. Now Pilate put a guard at the tomb, but all the people went home to begin their day of rest. Now our story will continue with what happened as the sun rose on Sunday morning, after the Sabbath was over. It is a day Christians call Easter.